Good evening, everyone. In the morning session, we discuss about the how this particular exams are working with the help of this particular try and multiple catches, as well as we identify the nested try example. Okay. Now, what we need to understand here, the nested try related information, how it is working internally, we identified in the morning example. So today we discuss about the one of the important example called throws keyword. Getting the point. So far, what we are doing basically, if you are trying to handle, like if I'm trying to implement the exception in between, if you are going to get an exception, compiler is creating an object of the particular exception here. Okay. Right now, we are not creating any exception. So who is creating internally? Compiler is creating the exceptions here. Now, what we need to understand carefully here, getting the point here, we are going to create an exception explicitly. So how we are going to create exception? So that with help of this particular throw keyword, we are going to create. So as I explained in the initial days, if any exception is occurred, the first exception object is going to create it. Getting the point. Once object is created, it will try to provide the exceptions information. But problem when you are trying to create a custom exceptions here, so we need to throw the exception because compiler cannot understand what kind of the custom exception you created. Okay, this is very important here. Okay, this is very important. We need to understand here. So how we can create the custom exception here? Okay, so using this particular throw keyword, we are going to create the custom exceptions here. Observe carefully. Observe carefully now how this particular the object is going to create. Whenever we are trying to create the throw keyword, we'll try to create the where is that exception we created in the custom exception. Now, if you see this, where I used this, I think now you can see we are using this particular throw keyword. Using this particular throw keyword, we are trying to create the new exception object here. So whenever we are using this particular new, this is we already identify here. We are going to create a new object of this particular exception, and explicitly we are throwing an exception. Getting the point. Explicitly, we are trying to throw an exception, but how we are throwing it? With help of this particular new exception. And this is a message you can provide what exactly your exception will contain here. Getting the point. What exactly your exception will contain here. So this is important. We need to understand here. Okay. Now, what I'm doing here, whenever we are doing this particular new keyword internally, it will try to create the object of this particular throwable. Why it will create an object of this particular throwable? Because so we need to understand the hierarchy here. What is an hierarchy? So the custom exception internally, it is extending something like runtime exception, and runtime exception internally, it is extending with the exception. Okay, so exception internally, it is trying to extend with the throwable. Okay, so here we are going to create object of this particular throwable. Later we'll create the exception, runtime exception, and finally, whatever the exception we are going to create, the particular exception we are going, this particular exception object is going to create it here. Getting the point. And this is very important here. Getting the point. And why we are creating the throwable? Because we are trying to extending all the predefined classes as well as the custom exception classes. All we are going to extend it from this particular throwable class here. Okay, this is we identified. But whenever we are trying to throw this particular exception, so we need to handle the catch blocks also. For example, if I'm not handling the catch block, what happening internally? So default the compiler will handle. Whenever the compiler will handle, now what happening internally? It is not going to execute the below statements here. Whatever the below statements we are going to have, the below statements are not going to executed by this particular our default catch blocks here. So let me write the simple example so that we can understand here how this particular the throw keyword it is going to use. So here I'm going to write the throw demo. Okay, inside this particular throw demo, now what I'm doing it, I'm trying to write the one of the important example here. Static void demo Okay, so static void demo proc. And now what I will do, I'm going to write the try block here, because inside the try block only we'll try to throw an exception. Now what is the exception I'm trying to throw? So observe carefully, explicitly I'm trying to throw an exception. Okay, explicitly I'm trying to throw an exception. Now observe carefully how many constructors we are having here. So three constructors here. So these three construction we already like no, only two constructors. Now observe carefully. The last one is a different constructor, but what we need to understand, only two constructors we are having. So one is the default constructor, second one is which is expecting parameters. Now what I will do here, I'm going to provide the message something like a demo. Okay, here I'm going to provide the message something like a demo here. Whenever I'm trying to provide this particular demo, now what I'm doing it, I'm trying to write the code, whichever the code we are going to throw an exception, like what kind of the code it is going to throw an exception. The particular code I define inside this particular try block. Now, what we need to understand here, whenever we are trying to throw this particular exception, get in the pen, whenever we are trying to throw this particular exception, we have a two options here. What are the two options? Either we can catch this particular exception, or we can go for the throws keyword. So right now I'm not going to discuss about the throws here. First we'll understand the catch block here. Later we'll move on to this particular throws here. Here only I'm trying to write catch block, and this particular catch block is handle the null pointer exception. Okay, so from where we are creating a object to, like where we are trying to throw the particular object here, the null pointer object here in the line number 6 here. And what we are doing at line number 7, we are trying to handle the same null pointer exceptions here. Getting the point? This is important, we need to understand here. Now what we can understand here, I'm trying to print this particular sys out here, and finally got here. Okay, so I'm trying to handle inside this particular demo proc here. This is important, we need to understand it. And if you observe carefully, this is very important example we are discussing here. So internally, whenever we are discussing this particular multiple exception, if you observe, if you are trying to get this particular exception here, the line number 9, what happening internally, the default compiler, it will try to create an object like this. Okay, it will try to create an object like this with help of this particular new, and the arithmetic exception object it will create, and it will use the keyword call throw. So to throw the exception here, whenever we are getting the division by 0 operation fail, now we'll get the, like we are getting an exception. What is an exception we are getting? Something like arithmetic exception. But how it is like getting the exception? Internally what we are doing is, we are trying to carry the pen. We are trying to, the compiler is trying to create object of this particular arithmetic exception. So once object is created, it will try to throw an exception. So once it is thrown exception, it's going to catch with this particular catch block. Same way, the arithmetic exception, how we catched here. Okay, how we catch this particular example. Now here, what I'm doing here, two operations I'm doing at a time. Like I'm doing the two operations side by side. Now if you see the line number 6, we are throwing an exception. Like line number 6, we are throwing an exception. In the same time, the line number 7, get in the pen. Line number 7. Now what I'm doing here, I'm handling the exception. Get in the pen. I'm trying to handle this particular exception here. Okay. So here, if we observe carefully from this particular catch block, now I'm trying to rethrow the exception. This is important. Getting the point. Basically, we are throwing an exception line number 6. Now imagine just for imagination, like we have around so 10 lines of code. Okay, in the 10 line of this particular 10 lines of code, now what happens internally? So around the line number 6 here, we are trying to throw this particular new null pointer exception. It is nothing but NPU. Okay, so I'm trying to throw null pointer exception. Whenever we are throwing, the 7, 8 to 9 will not execute. Getting the point? The 789 will not execute it. Now, what we need to understand basically, so whenever we are throwing an exception, the below statement will not execute up to the where, like in the line number, like at what line number we are getting an exception, up to the particular line, it will try to execute the compiler. So once this particular code is going to throw an exception, the compiler, it will try to look up the nearest catch block. Okay, nearest catch block, and we are trying to providing the nearest catch block. But whenever we are providing this particular nearest catch block, now internally what I am doing is line number 9. This particular line number 9, what I am doing is again I am trying to rethrow the exception. Getting the point? Again I am trying to rethrow this particular exception here. This is very important information we need to understand here. Whenever we are trying to rethrow the exception, again compiler will understand it where we are trying to handle this particular exception. So what is an exception we are trying to rethrow? So something like null pointer. Okay, null pointer exception we are trying to throw. This is one of the important example we need to understand here. So now what happening internally? If I'm going to rethrow this particular exception, what happens internally? So we need to understand this particular example here. So here after this, I'm going to write this particular main method, and inside this particular main method, now what I'm doing is I'm trying to write the, what is the name of the method we are having? Something like demo proc. So for example, if I'm not adding this particular try block here, if I'm not adding this particular try block, what happens internally? So we need to understand this simple example. So observe carefully what happening internally. Okay, this is important. So from where we provided the message, this is the message we provided, like caught inside the demo proc. Basically, it is a method. Okay, this is now what we need to understand here. So we are trying to throw an exception. The exception is handled here, but whenever we are handling this exception, so just for understanding, now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to rethrowing an exception here. So what you understand here, the throws keyword basically, when once object is created, we are trying to throw an exception. If you are not interested to handle an exception, what we can do, we can throw the exception here. So that I'm doing here, I'm not interested to handle the exception at line number 9. Now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to rethrow this particular exception. Whenever it is time to rethrow, what happens internally, it will try to look up the demo proc here. So at the demo proc method, whether we are trying to handle this particular exception or not, compiler will check. If you are not handling this particular exception, so what happens internally? The default logic is going to execute. Okay, whenever we are executing the default logic, we'll get this particular messages here because it is providing the path. This is, we'll call it as a path, and this is, we'll call it as a the exception information. Now what we are providing, so this is the null pointer exception, and I'm providing demo. I'm trying to provide the demo. Now what you understand here, so this is the toString method. Like what kind of the toString method is calling? Whatever the toString method we implemented inside this particular throwable class, the toString method it is calling here. Okay, this is important we need to understand here. So finally, what you observe carefully here, now finally what you observe here, basically this is the null pointer exception and colon demo. Okay, null pointer exception colon demo. This is one of the important example we need to understand. So for example, if I'm going to write a try and catch block here, and here I will not use this particular throw, and here so this is the main method and this is the demo proc method. So see the differences here, how it is going to print. Now whenever handling the one more catch block here, now how this particular exception is going to print. Okay, let me run this particular example. Observe carefully. The default catch block is handling here. Getting the point? The default catch block is handling? No. Getting the point? So what you need to understand basically here, what you need to understand here, whenever we are trying to come up with a try and catch block, the default mechanism called try catch block will not execute here. Okay, default to try and catch block will not execute here. So if you're not providing the try and catch block, then only the default object is going to execute here. So for example, basically here we are trying to throw an exception. Whenever we are trying to throw an exception here, we'll try to handle this particular catch block. But because of this particular line number 9, so this particular try and catch block we are implementing. So for example, if I'm trying to write this, like if I'm trying to comment out line number 9, if I'm executing this, only one statement here. So why the second statement is printed earlier? It is because of, like, already we are handling an exception, but after handling the exception, so again explicitly we are throwing an exception. So EX basically what is contained? It's contained this particular null pointer information here. For example, if I'm going to put a breakpoint here, now we'll understand here what exactly the EX will contain here. If you see carefully, so EX is nothing but null pointer object here. So the details message whatever we provided here, and some additional information. But where we created object here, getting the pen, where we created object, we created the line number 6 here, right? So this is the object here. And finally, we are trying to rethrow an exception. It is going to call the line number 15 is executing 16 block. Okay, this is important here. So any questions regarding this particular throw keyword? Okay, okay, finally. So now what I will do, I'm going to provide the another important keyword called throws here. So just now we identify this particular throw keyword. We'll try to discuss about the throws keyword. How this particular throws keyword is going to use. For example, if a method, whatever the method we are going to write, if the method is possible to causing an exceptions here. Because here if you see the demo proc, what happens the line number 4, the static method we define the demo proc here, what happening internally, it is trying to throw an exceptions here. Getting the point. Internally, we are trying to cause some exceptions here. Whenever the methods is causing an exception, what we can do here? So if you are not interested to handle an exception, okay. If you are not interested to handle an exception, what we can do? So we can use this particular keyword called throws, and we can rethrow the exception here. Okay, we can rethrow the particular exception here. So this is the basic functionality. It is provided by the throws keyword. Okay, this is very important information we need to understand here. Now, how I'm writing this? What I will do, I am not interested to handle this particular try catch block. So observe carefully. I remove this particular try and catch block. Okay, I remove this particular try and catch block. But now what happening internally? So let me format the code. Now I'm going to run this particular example. What happening internally? If you're not interested to handle the try and catch block at a method level, okay, what happening internally? We are trying to handle it at the main method level, so it is handle the catch block. So if this particular try and catch block is no longer available, the default try and catch block will going to handle. But now instead of this particular null pointer exception, now what I am doing is I am going to handle the one of the important exception exception class called illegal access exception. Okay. Now, whenever I modify this particular illegal access exception, observe carefully, I am getting an error. So not only this, getting the point, not only this particular illegal access, now in the earlier example, what we discussed here, class not found also. Okay, class not found exception. Whenever I'm using this particular class not found exception also, I am getting an error. But why we did not get any error for this particular null pointer exception? Okay, why I'm getting an but the particular error message for this particular class not found? Because it is a checked exception. Getting the point? Because it is a checked exception. So observe carefully here. What I'm doing is I'm trying to handle the throws declaration, and you can try with try and catch block. Right now, I'm not interested to handle this exception here. Right now, I'm not interested to handle this particular exception. Now, what we can do, I'm going to use this particular throws keyword. So observe carefully. Here, whenever I'm trying to use this particular throws keyword, here I'm getting an error. Okay. So what I want to provide, line number 5, line number 6, I'm throwing an exception. This is the first. Okay. Whenever we are trying to throw an exception, what are the two suggestions we are getting? Either you can go for this particular throws, or you can go for the try and catch block. Okay, so we already identified this particular try and catch block example. So now what I'm doing it, I'm trying to use this particular throws. Throws basically what it will do, this particular method, whatever the method we are trying to throw this, it will try to hand over into the method calling. Getting the pen? It is hand over into the method calling. For example, from where we are calling the demo proc here, from the main method, we are calling the demo proc, like line number 11. From the line number 11, I'm calling the line number 6. Okay, now what happens internally? This particular throws internally, it will hand over to this particular line number 11, demo proc. Okay, this is the method we implemented. Now what happens internally? Whenever I'm trying to write this particular method, here again we are having the two options. What are the two options? Same. You can go for this particular throws, or you can go for this particular try catch block. So that we already identified the try catch block. Now what I will do? I will go for the throws keyword. So now what I'm doing it? First here we are throwing an exception. Secondly, instead of handling this particular exception, again rethrowing here. Getting the point? This is basically rethrowing a exception here. That the exception I'm not interested to handle this. Getting the point? Here I'm not interested to handle this particular exception. So whenever I'm not interested, what we can do? From which location we are going to call, I'm trying to hand over this particular exception information into the particular method calling. So here, that what is the calling here? Something like a demo proc. The exception, now it is handed out to this particular calling. Here again we are having the two options. So this particular demo proc, this particular demo proc is going to call from the where? It's going to call from the main. Okay, so whenever it is called from this particular main, now what happens internally? The demo proc internally it will hand over to this particular demo proc, like main method. So here I'm using throws here. So this is the three steps here. This is the three steps. Basically, one step we are creating an object. Okay, second step we are trying to rethrowing an exception, and the third step here we are trying to again rethrowing an exception. And the main method, the main method what it will do, it will try to handle all the exception with help of this particular default to try and catch block. Okay, otherwise instead of the line number 3, if you are not interested to rethrow an exception, what we can do, we'll go for the try and catch block to handle this particular exception. But any one of the place, any one of the location, this particular throws is going to stop, and there we'll go for the try and catch block. For example, so this method is calling from the 10 locations here. The demo proc whatever the demo proc is going to call. So service, like first we'll call it as a one controller, controller to here. Here I'm trying to write the controller. Okay, so controller to service it's called. Service to, now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to call one more service here. Okay, from one more service, like service one, service two, something like I'm going to write one more service. So this is the service. From this particular service three, now it will call the our like a database. So simply I'm writing DB. Okay, this DB, inside this particular DB, now what I'm doing here, I'm throwing an exception using this particular throw keyword. Okay, I'm not using the throws keyword, so I'm using throw new something like XYZ exception. Now what happening internally, whenever we are throwing an exception, what is the two suggestions here? Get in the pen. What is the two suggestion we are going to get? First one, throws we can go for, otherwise. Okay, so otherwise, now what we need here, we are going to handle with the try catch block here. Okay, now what I'm doing here, I'm not interested to handle this particular try and catch block. For this particular exception, I'm not interested to handle this particular exception. What we will do, we'll rethrow the exception. DB to service, service to, okay, service 3 to service 2, from service to service 1, and from the service 1 to controller. Inside the controller, you can handle with the try catch block. Get in the pen. You can handle with the try catch block, or if you are not interested, you can rethrow. Whenever you're trying to rethrow, what happens internally? The default try catch block will handle. Okay, default try catch block will handle here. Getting the point. This is the the important hierarchy we are discussing here. Okay, this is the concept we are going to use for this particular throws keyword, not for the throw keyword. And basically, your questions here, most of the cases, what we will do, we'll try to handle, like we'll try to rethrow the exception from the whatever I'm trying to explain here, like from the different services. Getting the point. From the different services, if you want to handle all the exceptions into the controller class, okay. If you are interested to handle all the exception class in the controller, we'll try to rethrow the exception to the up to the controller class. But sometimes what happens here, wherever we are getting an exception, we'll try to handle the exception in the same class here. Getting the point. Most of the cases we'll handle all the information in the controller class because we'll try to provide the generic message. Okay, user cannot understand the what happening internally. So what we need to do, we need to provide the generic messages. To provide the generic message, what we can do, we need to write the custom catch blocks, and we can provide the information here. Okay, so this is the way of calling the particular throws keyword. Any questions? Okay, Nick, you have no questions as high? Okay, now what I will do, so I will remove this particular diagram here. Yes, we can go for the throws we can use for the both checked exceptions as well as unchecked exceptions here. It will work on the both. Now observe carefully what we are doing here. We are trying to throw in this particular exception. We are handling here. I'm not interested to throw I'm not interested to handle try catch block here. Now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to rethrow an exception. Whenever we are trying to rethrow here, basically this is the path here. From here only this method is going to call, and here the exception we are coming back to this particular same method or not. Here we are trying to rethrow the exception with help of this particular throws keyword. with the help of this particular throws keyword. Now what we can do here, again here we are having two options. So add with the try catch block, or you can use the same rethrow this particular concept information to the main method. If I'm going to add this information to this, now we are not getting any error here. Getting the point? Now we are not getting any error. But observe carefully, if you are not interested to handle the exception with the try catch block, this keyword must and should we need to use. Okay, this keyword must and should we need to use here. This is one of the important here. So this is saying that if we are not interested to handle the exception information inside this particular method. Here it is saying to the demo proc, and here it is saying to the main method. Okay, if I'm going to run this example, we'll see, because in the two cases we are not interested to handle the exception. In the two cases we are not interested. In the what are the two cases? First one is the demo proc method level, and another one is main method level. In the two cases, if you are not interested, what happens internally? The default try catch block will call, and it will try to execute all the information. Now what you need to understand here, if you are not interested to rethrow here, modify this. Okay, modify this, and we'll see what happens internally. I'm going to run which one is taking the highest priority here. Now you can see inside main method. So even though you are using the throws class not found exception, because it's which the highest priority, so it's taken by the catch block. Why it is taking the highest priority? Because already this exception we are trying to rethrow here. The line number 4 method, the exception is already rethrowing it, and whatever the code which is going to throw an exception, the particular code we already defined inside this particular try block. So the suggestion, like the option, basically code already is under the try block, the catch block will execute it. If this particular code is not available under this particular demo proc, so this particular catch block will not execute. But so there is no syntax. Without the try block, we are not going to write the catch block here. Okay, this is important here, because you may get some logical questions on this particular exception only, like try can contain the finally without the catch, like a try can contain catch and finally, or only finally. So some little bit logical questions you may get here, but the problem, try either catch or finally we can provide any one of this, or if you are providing both also, it will allow here. It will not give any errors here. So that example we already discussed in the earlier examples here. Okay, so this is related to the particular throws example. Okay, now we discuss about the finally. I don't want to discuss one more the finally example. Now what we need to understand here, what are all the built-in exceptions here? Getting the point? What are all the built-in exceptions we have? So we have a lot of built-in exceptions here. The few of we already identified, something like arithmetic and array index, and something like class exception. We have seen the class information, but we did not use that one. Okay, and the same way illegal argument exception. Okay, so what I will do, I will try to provide the classes information here, and now you can see this is the illegal argument exception, and illegal argument exception is extending from the runtime exception. Any method is extending from the runtime exception, we'll call it as a unchecked here. Okay, this is the unchecked exception. So same, any class you are going to open, it will contain only constructors, because everything is handled from the throwable class. Any exception, whether it is checked exceptions or unchecked exception, each and every objects are going to created inside the throwable class. Okay, and here now what we are doing here, so what is the purpose of this? Throw and indicate, basically this particular exception is going to throw that a method has been passed an illegal or inappropriate the argument here. Basically whatever the data type, for example I provided something like a person, Okay, but what I'm doing here, this is the type of this particular method parameter. Here I'm providing like a person P. So here I'm going to use something, the name of the method update. Okay, this is the update method which is expecting one parameter, so something like a person object. Now here I'm calling update method, and here I'm passing M1. M1 is the reference variable of member. Okay, what happening internally? So the type it is not going to match. So this is, so in that scenarios we are going to get this particular arguments exceptions here. Now you can read this. So it is indicate that method has been passed an illegal or inappropriate argument here. Getting the point? Inappropriate argument whenever we are going to provide here. So we may get this particular exceptions here. So this exception is available from 1.0 onwards here. So any class if you open here, when this particular class is created, every information we can easily understand here. Now, now you can see all the constructors also we can understand here. For example, this constructor is introduced from the 1.5. Okay, and this constructor also same 1.5. Okay, this is the way we can easily understand what are all the constructors newly created and what are all the constructors are coming from the old, and this class is created from the beginning or in middle, the classes are or not, we can easily understand here. Okay, we have a lot of default exception classes here. Now I will give you the, like I'm going to add this particular information inside this particular, so PPT, I'm trying to creating the PPT. So like I will give you, once our core Java is going to complete, I will try to provide the PPT for this particular core Java, whatever we discussed so far here. Okay, and we define the our custom exception. So where we define the custom exception, here the code is indicating this. So this is the custom exception. What I'm doing is I'm trying to extending this particular class with the exception class, and I'm having one parameter to provide the message here, and this is the constructors I'm calling. So same way if you see this, it is also doing same thing, and illegal argument exception is extending from the runtime, and this is the default constructor, parameters constructor, and this is also one more parameter constructor and one more parameter. Other than this, we don't have any much information. Everything is going to handle by throwable class. Okay, but this is the constructor like custom exception creation. So you like we cannot forget this particular the hierarchy. So like which class we can extend, that is important here, so that we can create a n number of custom exceptions in our applications here. Okay, this is one of the important example. So any questions? Any questions regarding this particular custom exception? Okay, now what we need to understand here, chain exception. How this particular chain exceptions are going to work. So this particular chain exceptions are introduced from the 1.4 onwards here. Basically, what it will do, it will try to come up with a subsystem here. Once object is created, if I want to create any the child object here, how we are going to use it with help of this particular like chain expression will identify here. Okay, basically what happens internally, it is going to allow like this particular the chain exception is going to allow the associate with another exceptions here. So we already created the one exception class. If I want to add another exception information, what we can do, we can add as a the chain exceptions here. But how we are going to add this, that is important here. So we have some methods here, something like a init class. Okay, so using this particular init class, we are going to have the chained exceptions. So where we define here, throw demo. Okay, now here I'm going to write the CFE dot, we have a one method called init class. So using this particular method, now what we can do, we can add another method, like another exception. So for example, now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to provide the arithmetic exception. So here we can write the another message here. So this is basically, we'll call it as a chained exception here. How we are like this is the topmost object. Class not found is the topmost object, but finally with help of this particular init class, I am appending, like I'm adding with the subtype call one of the another exceptions here. It is nothing but we are going to add multiple chain exceptions here. Okay, multiple chain exceptions here. What happens internally? Whenever we are going to handle this class not found exception, internally how it is going to print. Okay, now you can see why I'm getting, okay, cannot override the cause with arithmetic exception, because these two are the difference here. These two are the different information. For example, if I'm going to write this particular null pointer exception, for example, okay, here I'm trying to write the null pointer exception. Now what happens internally? So observe carefully. What happening internally? So it is not calling this particular exceptions here. Why it is not calling it? Getting the point. Here we are trying to handle the same null pointer exception here. Okay, so this is very important example we need to understand. So if I'm going to remove this, if I'm going to remove this particular throws here, no. Okay, so I missed it. Basically, if you observe, here I'm trying to create an exception, but I'm not throwing an exception. Just I'm creating an exception object here. Getting the point? Just I created the exception object here. I did not throw this particular exception. I missed this. CFE. Okay, we need to throw this particular exception. Now, what happens internally? So whatever the exception we are having inside this particular exception, it is causing this. So if you observe carefully, here I'm going to print this particular EX here. Along with this particular EX here, now I'm going to write one more println statement here. One more println statement. So here I'm going to write EX dot get cause. Okay, this is important here, because what we are doing here we are trying to write the init cause. So we are appending with another exception, and the another exception whatever we appended, here I'm going to load that here. Okay, here I'm trying to load the particular exceptions information. Now you can see, so first one is a null pointer exception, second one is a arithmetic exception. But how we are getting these two? This is the main exception we created, and I'm trying to add some sub exceptions informations here. It's like the chained exception here, and I'm loading the original one. Okay, and this is the whatever the class we added, the particular class here. So it is showing here two exceptions here. So this section will call it as a chained exception. Most of the cases we are not going to use, just for I'm giving the information. But in future, if we want to add any exceptions, so this is the way of adding this particular exceptions here. Okay, so this is, we need to understand the one of the important information. Okay, now one another important information what we need to understand here, how we can write the so try with the resource. So this is the important feature they introduced in 1.7, that we'll call it as a try with the resource here. So what exactly the try with resource is doing here? Here in the same catch block, we are going to write multiple exceptions. In the same catch block, we are going to write multiple exceptions here. But the exceptions is, again, we need to follow the hierarchy. Again, we need to follow the hierarchy here. For example, now what I will do, I'm going to write the same code, whatever we implemented in the multi-dimensions example. Okay, here what I'm doing is here I'm going to use the this is we'll call it as a multiple exception in the same catch block. Okay, so I'm removing this. Getting the point. Divide by 0 or what we can do, you can provide this also. Any one of the exception we are going to get here. Okay, now observe carefully what I'm doing here. Here I'm trying to write the arithmetic exception and array index out of bound exception. So now what it will do, the particular catch block, if we get any exception, okay, if we get any exception based on the, if we get an arithmetic, this section will call, or if you pass the arithmetic exception also, this line number 16 will execute. So this is, we'll call it as a try with resource. Try with resource, basically what happens internally, it will try to handle the all the exceptions in a one catch block. Okay, any exception we are going to get here, we can write the same message for the all the exception. In that case, we can use this particular try with the resource, but most of the cases we are not going to use, because for each exception we'll write the specific logic. Getting the point? In the real-time scenarios, the catch block will contain the more code. Sometimes catch blocks only will contain the more code compared to this particular try block. Getting the point? So now you can think here how the catch block is important here, because so once the exception is occurred, we'll write the status code and again we'll roll back all the changes from the databases, cloud. If you are inserting any other environments here, we need to roll back the data here, because we got an exceptions, like we cannot commit the changes here. So everything, the rollback changes, all we are going to write inside this particular catch block, and we'll try to insert the error related information into some different two tables here. For the future references here, we'll try to write the data into the different tables. So this particular code we are going to write inside this particular catch blocks only. Okay, this is the one of the important example we are discussing here. And so if we don't have anything, we'll continue tomorrow. One of the important example, so something like multi-threading. The multi-threading concept we are going to discuss here. Okay, so anyone having any questions so regarding today's session?
సార్ 17 ఉంది కదా సార్, క్యాచ్ ఎక్సెప్షన్ సార్, అదేంటి సార్? అది అర్థం కాలేదు సార్.
17 ఇదా?
ఎస్ సార్. అది ఎందుకు యూజ్ చేస్తారు?
ఇది ఎందుకు యూజ్ చేశానంటే బేసిక్గా, అంటే ఇప్పుడు రాసిన కోడ్ ఈ రెండు ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ కాకుండా ఇంకేమైనా ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ వస్తే, ఓకే, ఇంకేమైనా ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ వస్తే అప్పుడు ఈ క్యాచ్ బ్లాక్ హ్యాండిల్ చేస్తుంది. అంటే ఈ రెండే ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ కాకుండా ఇంకా వేరే ఉన్నాయి. ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్, సో ఇంత ఎక్స్ప్లెయిన్ చేస్తున్నట్టుగా క్లాస్ నాట్ ఫౌండ్, ఇల్లీగల్ ఆర్గ్యుమెంట్, క్లాస్ కాస్ట్, ఓకే, నల్ పాయింటర్, ఇంకా డిఫరెంట్ ఎక్సెప్షన్ ఏమైనా వస్తే అప్పుడు ఈ క్యాచ్ బ్లాక్ హ్యాండిల్ చేస్తుంది. ఎందుకంటే ఇది సూపర్ టైప్. ఇక్కడ ఎక్సెప్షన్ అనేది సూపర్ టైప్, అర్థమెటిక్, అరే ఇండెక్స్ అనేది సబ్ టైప్. బికాస్ ఎక్సెప్షన్ నుంచి ఈ రెండు క్లాసులు ఎక్స్టెండ్ అవుతున్నాయి. ఓకే, మనం ఇది ఆల్రెడీ డిస్కస్ చేసుకున్నాం ఇన్హెరిటెన్స్ లో సూపర్ క్లాస్, సబ్ క్లాస్ అని.
కానీ కన్ఫర్మ్ గా యూజ్ చేయాలా సార్ అది?
కన్ఫామ్ గా యూజ్ చేయాలి అంటే బేసిక్గా నీ కోడ్లో ఓన్లీ ఈ రెండు ఎక్సెప్షన్సే వస్తాయి అంటే అవసరం లేదు. ఓకే, ఓన్లీ ఈ కోడ్ వరకైతే ఈ రెండు ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ వస్తాయి. బట్ ఇన్ ఫ్యూచర్ ఏమవుతాయంటే, అంటే రియల్ టైమ్ అప్లికేషన్స్లో ఈ రెండు ఎగ్జాంపుల్ ఈ రెండు ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ కాకుండా కనెక్షన్ రిలేటెడ్ రావచ్చు. ఓకే, అండ్ అప్లికేషన్ రిలేటెడ్ రావచ్చు, సర్వర్ డౌన్ అయి ఉండొచ్చు, సర్వర్ మెమరీ ఫెయిల్యూర్ అయిన ఉండొచ్చు, ఇంకా డిఫరెంట్ ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ వస్తాయి. ఓకే, అప్పుడు ఈ బిలో ఇంకా ఏవైతే ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ రాస్తావో ఆ ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ హ్యాండిల్ చేస్తాయి. దాని పర్పస్గా ఎలా రాసుకోవచ్చు అనేది నేను సింటాక్స్ ఎక్స్ప్లెయిన్ చేశాను ఇక్కడ. ఓకే, రియల్ టైంలో ఒక ఈ అర్థమెటిక్ అరే ఇండెక్స్ కాకుండా పాస్వర్డ్ రిలేటెడ్ ఉంటావి. ఓకే, నిన్న చెప్పినట్టుగా ఆ ఫేస్బుక్ రిలేటెడ్ కొన్ని ఎగ్జాంపుల్ చెప్పాను కదా, అట్లాంటి ఎక్సెప్షన్ చాలా ఉంటాయి. అప్లికేషన్ లెవెల్లో ఫెయిల్యూర్ కానీ, అవుట్ ఆఫ్ మెమరీ కానీ, కనెక్షన్ రిలేటెడ్ కానీ, దాని తర్వాత వస్తే సో డేటాబేస్ రిలేటెడ్ కానీ, అప్లికేషన్లో ఏమన్నా నువ్వు ప్రాపర్గా వ్యాలిడేషన్ పర్పస్గా కొన్ని ఉంటాయి. దాని తర్వాత ఏడబ్ల్యూఎస్ రిలేటెడ్ అంటే క్లౌడ్ రిలేటెడ్ ఎన్విరాన్మెంట్ కొన్ని ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ ఉంటాయి. ఇట్లా చాలా రకరకాల ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ ఉంటాయి. అవన్నీ హ్యాండిల్ చేసుకోవాల్సి వస్తుంది. అప్పుడు ఇలాగా ఇంకొక క్యాచ్ బ్లాక్ రాసుకుంటాము. ఏవైతే మనకి ఎక్సెప్షన్స్ అంటే వస్తాయి అనుకుంటామో ఆ ఎక్సెప్షన్ ఇలా డిఫైన్ చేసుకుంటాము. సేమ్ ఇప్పుడు ఎలా అయితే రాసామో అలాగేనే రాస్తాము, బట్ ఎక్సెప్షన్ నేమ్స్ చేంజ్ అవుతాయి. అదొకటే డిఫరెన్స్. ఓకే, క్లియరా? Yeah. So Saddam, yeah, I reviewed your comments here. No problem. Last weekend I had some issues, so I could not connect the sessions here. So will this Sunday we'll try to cover up the weekend classes also. Okay. So we'll try to continue the our classes daily. But most important here, you need to practice very well. So then only the day-to-day classes we can understand here. And if you are interested to join, so tomorrow the 7 a.m. I'm going to start the Lambda related example here. You can join the session tomorrow. You'll get to understand like how the Lambda is going to work internally. Okay, 7 to 8 we have a one session. I'm going to explain the Lambda related concepts here. So same link it is applicable for the 7 a.m. sessions as well. You can join the session. Okay, any other questions? Okay, if we don't have anything, we'll continue tomorrow.